Hey guys, it's Misty from the Book Rat, and today we are following up my 2016 favorite reads list with some honorable mentions that just didn't quite make the cut. If you missed that video, I will have it linked in the description as well as in the end card, so you can check that out. And all of the books I'm mentioning today will be linked down there too, as well as any reviews if I reviewed them. So let's get into it. I'm going to kick things off with one that actually probably should have gone in my favorites, but I don't know where I set it, and since it wasn't sitting in front of me, I forgot to mention it, and that is Interference by Kay Honeyman. It's described as Emma meets Friday Night Lights, and though I've only seen a few episodes of Friday Night Lights, it definitely nails all of the Emma aspects, and I think is a really, really clever reinterpretation of Emma. I really liked it, but I also really like Emma. I know a lot of people don't like Emma the character, and as a result don't like Emma the story, and so if that's the case, you might not like this either, but I really liked it. So that actually probably should have gone in my favorites, but on to the honorable mentions. And as I said in that first video, last year was the year of comics and graphic novels for me. I just fell in love with so many, and though I mentioned a lot of them in that favorites video, I had a lot more that kind of fell into the honorable mention category for me, which doesn't mean that they weren't excellent, but I didn't want to put all of them in the favorites. I wanted to limit it to really my absolute favorites. So to that end, I have 4 more that I want to talk about that definitely deserve some love. The first one, again, maybe should have gone in my favorites because I really did hit myself in the face with this. I really did love this, and it's Mighty Jack by Ben Hatke. It's a retelling of Jack and the Beanstalk, and it's just stellar, as is everything that Ben does. I love his style, I love his heart and warmth in the stories and characters that he creates. I love the art and the coloring, especially I love his coloring. I love the fantastical elements of this, and especially this little character right here. Actually, I love all of them. They're all fantastic, but she's pretty fierce, and as a kid, I would have fallen in love with her. It's just stellar across the board, and if you haven't read anything by Ben, you should just go ahead and go get it all, because it's all worth it. Excellent. Speaking of stellar, fierce female characters that I would have loved as a kid, next we have Roller Girl by Victoria Jameson. This is so fantastic. The art is very vibrant and colorful and simple, but it pops. When you're talking about characters I love, this little girl, she's fantastic. This was a great story. I absolutely loved it. I read it right at the beginning of the year, and it was a great way to kind of kick off a new year of reading, because I don't think there was anything about this that I didn't like. Plus, roller derby. The trend of these comics, and the ones that I mentioned in my favorites, might be female characters who kick ass and I love them. Because here we have another. This is Delilah Dirk and the King's Shilling. This is book 2 in the Delilah Dirk series. The first is Delilah Dirk and the Turkish Lieutenant. I loved that. I love them, Delilah and the Turkish Lieutenant, aka Salim. Again, probably actually should have been in my favorites, because now that I'm flipping through it again, I loved this. It's so, again, vibrant. The art is beautiful. The coloring is beautiful. The humor in this is fantastic. Both Delilah and Salim are some of my favorite characters. I love their interactions. I love their relationship. It's so, so good. It's such a great, fun, engaging, vibrant series. If you haven't started this one, definitely pick it up. I might be more enthusiastic about some of these honorable mentions than I was about my favorites. The last in this little clump of books in the comic section definitely does belong in the honorable mention section. This wasn't one of my favorites. I didn't like it as much as I wanted to, but that said, I still did really like it, and that is Nimona by Noelle Stevenson. Part of this was just that so many people have talked this up and highly recommended it, and other works by Noelle, so it might have just been partly expectations, but it took me a little longer to connect to this than I would have liked. That said, once it really got going for me and I did connect, I still really loved it. And it's memorable. It's something I really enjoyed. It just fell a little shy of being one of my absolute favorites. Part of that, though, is probably the triangle nose thing. Something I will never understand that absolutely just irritates the hell out of me in some illustrator styles. I know that noses are hard to illustrate. I know they're a pain in the ass. But there are a few ways that people illustrate them that really irritate me, and one is having just a plain triangle, literally like all three sides drawn in, that is a different color than the flesh tone to represent a nose. I really hate that. No, Noelle Stevenson takes it a little step further in that she does that, but she also does like the weirdest nostrils I've ever seen. Can you even see those weird nostrils? It's like this weird little squiggle that I know is just a quick impressionistic way to indicate nose and indicate nostrils, but it just grates on me. So I think that's part of what made it so hard for me to get into this for the longest time, because every panel I was just looking at their noses and focusing on that instead of the story. So I just kind of had to get over that. It is fun. It is quirky and silly, and you know, it is up my alley. It's something I enjoyed, and it definitely deserves a spot in the honorable mentions, but that one little thing just irritates me, and she's not the only one that does it. I see it a lot, and I really hate it. That was it for the sort of comic side of things. Now into some other great books that I read last year. The first one is The Killing Jar by Jennifer Bosworth. I almost mentioned this in the favorites when I was talking about After the Woods and The Darkest Corners, because I kind of think of them all together along with another book that's going to end up in my least favorites video. I talked about them in my sort of trend of 2016 video about dark and gritty books, and did talk about this being one of my favorites, and it was. I really did like this when I read it, but it kind of fell apart a little bit at the end for me, and it goes a little not quite cheesy and not quite cliched, but just enough to knock it back that little bit to keep it from being one of my favorites into just a book I really enjoyed. That said, I do think that it explores the dark sort of gray areas really well. It has one of the strongest openings I've read in a while. I did a little excerpt video on that, and I will link that so you can check it out, and definitely do so. Go listen to that little bit of the beginning and see how kind of dark and morally gray it is, because I really think it excelled at that. But it wasn't quite strong enough all the way through to rank up there with After the Woods, which I read at the same time. I read them back to back, and that one just kind of nudged this one out a little bit, but still really good. Then we have Night Struck by Jenna Black. This is urban fantasy horror and really does capitalize on the gruesome horror aspects. It's been so long since I've read something like that. I used to really love urban fantasy and the sort of gruesome, dark aspects of the urban fantasy horror hybrid. Horror itself, I find, is a little too predictable and a little too cheesy for me. I used to really love it when I was a kid, but you know, you get sick of those patterns and figuring out like who the bad guy is, and everything becomes a foregone conclusion, and I kind of get over that. So I kind of gave up on horror. But taking horror elements and those really dark, squicky elements from horror and incorporating it into something else kind of gives me the best of both worlds. And so this was just refreshing. It was something that I didn't realize how much I was missing it. It made me want to go read a bunch of other things by Jenna Black, and I do have books by her, so that will happen this year. And it made me want more things like it. Now, it's definitely a little weirder and probably out there for some people. It's strange, and it's also an ending that not everyone's gonna love. I assume there's gonna be another book, but you never know. If there's not another book, it's a kind of black ending that might make people angry, but I don't know, it really worked for me. It was the right read at the right time, and I really enjoyed it. If you like the sort of dark, really gruesome, really black storytelling, Night Struck. Then we have Rebel of the Sands by Alwyn Newton. This was one that I really, really enjoyed at the time. It didn't end up in the favorites just because it kind of fell off my radar a little bit as the year went on. To really make it into the favorites, it's got to really linger with me and stick with me. And this, I kind of kept forgetting that I had read it, and then I would go through Goodreads and be like, oh yeah, I really liked that. Which is what puts it in the honorable mention category for me. If it had been lingering, and if I had been like, oh my god, I need book 2 right now, throughout the year after I'd read it, it would have absolutely ended up in the favorites. But because I was able to kind of forget about it a little bit, that bumped it back. But that said, even though I know a lot of people had issues with this, I found it really enjoyable and engaging, very quick, very smooth writing and well-paced, and just I really enjoyed it and am looking forward to book 2, even if I did kind of forget that I was. So. And the last one on the list is Spirit and Dust by Rosemary Clement Moore. I read this toward the end of the year, and I think this is the first time I've talked to you guys about it because it wasn't in a TBR, it wasn't a planned read. I was just so frustrated with everything I was reading and kind of stalled out on everything, and I was feeling really willful. And so I was just like, screw it, I'm not reading those things. And I looked at my shelves and said, what do I want to read right now? And I pulled off maybe 3 books or so, read the first little bit of each, and went with this one. And the reason I went with this one is because I know that for me, Rosemary Clement Moore is a great funk breaker. There's just something about her. Her stories are engaging and have a great sense of humor and typical enough to make them quick, easy reads, but they've got their little tweaks and they're great, fantastic characters to keep them interesting so that I don't just further my rut and feel like everything is just much of a sameness. So this, again, is another one that made me want to immediately read more by her. I have other books by her and definitely need to get to them. It also made me want to reread Texas Gothic, which I loved, and which this is a follow-up to. So highly recommend both of those, and I've really liked everything I've read by her. So this one was a great note to kind of begin the end of the year on. I read this, and then I read Uprooted, which was another one off of my shelves that wasn't scheduled, and that was one of the ones I pulled off during this whole little willful moment, and I loved them both. In fact, Uprooted I listed as my favorite book of the year. So sometimes you just gotta shake things up and go with what you know is probably gonna work for you, and at the time, this was that book. So those were my honorable mentions for 2016, all great books that I would recommend in addition to all of the books that were in my 2016 favorites. That's a nice tidy stack of books for you to work your way through and find some books that you're gonna love. If you have read them, let me know what you think of them in the comments, and if you disagreed, definitely tell me that. Like, there's nothing wrong with us not having the same taste or the same impression of a book. If you hated one of them, chat with me about that. And if you have some favorites or honorable mentions that you want to share, I would definitely love to hear them. And it's a great way for people in the comments to find even more book recommendations, so make your voice heard. But that's all for this video. Keep an eye out because in a few days I will be posting my least favorite, most disappointing books of 2016, so something to look forward to. And hopefully none of the books on this month's TBR will end up in the worst of 2017, but you know, there's a good chance that's going to happen because the book that I just finished was not a favorite. So we'll see how the year goes, but that's all for now. As always, thanks for watching and happy reading!